Looks like we have one hand raised from Jeff Flory. Do you want me to allow him to ask a question?
Be great.
Oh, or not. I guess it disappeared.
Let's give it a couple more minutes here for people to roll in.
I'll be off screen, but if you need me, just let me know, and I can communicate in chat or unmute, however you need.
Thanks, Elliot. Well, it looks like we've got a good number of people here, so let's get started. Thanks everyone for joining us this morning. My name is Josh LeBombard. I'm the Southern Oregon Regional Representative for the department. I'm standing in today for Gordon Howard, who's our Community Services Division Manager, who's on vacation today. So basically today we're just going to go through a few things about our technical assistance grants. First, we're going to just go and give a general grant program overview. Then we'll get in a little bit more into the details about the project categories and provide some examples of projects that fit within those categories. We're also going to spend a little time talking about the equity guidelines, which are fairly new for DLCD as part of this application process and the project submittals. And then we'll have some time for questions and answers at the end. So feel free, ideally we can hold the Q&A to the end, but if it's something that you need to drop off before the end of the session, you can either ask a question in the chat or raise your hand and we can unmute you. In regards to the grants overview, we're going to give a little bit of information about the project or the funding opportunities. We're going to talk about the application timeline, talk about eligible projects, and then also the application evaluation criteria. So technical assistance grants are part of a suite of grants that are offered from DLCD. This slide here only touches on the general fund grant in regards to technical assistance. Our budget for technical assistance this year is, I think, roughly 1.7 million or so. But then that is broken up into a few different categories. So we have assistance, our Grant Young Memorial Planning Assistance, which goes to smaller jurisdictions. That's a set amount to jurisdictions. We also have a specific allocation for the Columbia Gorge, and also a direct allocation for the Population Research Center at PSU, who does population forecasting and also dispute resolution as part of that. So basically what that means at the end of the day, for our general technical assistance grants program, we have roughly $920,000. As many of you who have participated in this program in the past know, that we are generally oversubscribed, meaning that we get more requests for grants than we can allocate, that we have money for. Usually that's about 2 to 1, between 2 to 1 and 4 to 1. So it is a pretty competitive process. And you'll want to pay particular attention to the stuff we go over in this presentation right now, because if you can check more of the boxes in your application, you'll be more successful in your application. In regards to the timeline, we open up the application process on August 15th. Applications, you guys have time to develop those between then and the end of September. The applications are due October 2nd. After submittal of the grants, October 2nd, we'll have in-house DLCD will have about a month and a half to be able to make decisions and notify folks. We will have a decision made by December 1st. I think that's at the latest. I'll have to check in with Gordon Howard about whether that's a firm deadline or not, but I would think that would be the latest that we'll make a decision on the grants. Something that I'm not sure how many newbies are here, but it's a biennial grant. So we basically get money allocated to the department for 2 years at a time. So our grants open up at one time, and that's for 2 years. So we don't, not like some other programs like our TGM program and other programs that open up every year. This is once every 2 years. The applicants that are eligible for the grant, so a typical jurisdiction's a city or a county. Cities or counties can apply jointly as well, with one jurisdiction acting as the lead, as the contact for that. We can also open it up to multiple cities and counties with one jurisdiction as the contact as well. The difference with that is typically, or in the past, we've had open solicitations for multiple jurisdictions submitting for one project. So for instance, we had a code update for counties to bring counties up to current standards as far as state law is concerned and administrative rules concerned. If we're open to jurisdictions working collaboratively to submit application in that regard as well. Council of Governments are able to submit on behalf of jurisdictions. Recognized tribal governments or groups of tribal governments are eligible to submit. Any other regional planning agencies and port districts. So as with previous years, we do have an eligibility for projects. We have a prioritization scheme. The first priority, and these are in order of priority. So the higher up you can get on this list, the better or the more likely you are to get funded. And I'll go into some more detail on some of these. And we have Christine Shirley from our hazards division, who's going to go into the natural hazards piece of this. The first priority is economic development and promoting economic development. We'll go into and provide a couple examples of what that means. The second one is to plan for resilience to natural hazards and climate change. The third priority is to plan for resolution of a local planning issue that can provide solutions or guidance for other local governments. So really what this is getting at is providing something that could be replicated in other parts of the state. The fourth priority is to provide infrastructure financing plans for urbanizing areas. And then the last priority is to update comprehensive plans and implementing codes to respond to changes in state law or advanced regulatory streamlining. So this slide really is getting into how DLCD prioritizes applications. So the first piece is really important, and it's really to focus on the project objective and the description. So what we want from you all is as clear as possible of an objective and a scope of work, and how that those objectives and scope of work align with the priorities that I just described. Secondly, we do want to make sure or want the jurisdictions or applicants to demonstrate that they have adequate local capacity to manage the projects. I don't want this to get confused in some way that we're putting priority on larger jurisdictions here. I want to emphasize that we do have a lot of jurisdictions that don't have substantial capacity around the state. And we are very much in the position to be able to help those jurisdictions when it comes to capacity. Really what this is going to get into, though, is something I'll address later, which is contacting your regional representative and kind of working out the details on that with them. So while the grantee capacity is a mandatory piece of this, we obviously don't want to have an applicant who doesn't have sufficient resources to devote to this. We do have staff that are available to be able to provide assistance to smaller jurisdictions that may not be able to provide capacity in all aspects. The next piece of this is our regional solutions team priorities. I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with the governor's regional solutions teams, but basically these are teams of folks like regional representatives at DLCD and their counterparts in other jurisdictions or in other state agencies across the state. So Department of Environmental Quality, ODOT, Business Oregon, Water Resources, a few other departments. And there are regions across the state where these teams come together and address multi-faceted issues. In the past, each regional solutions team has had a list of priorities. This year, with kind of some reshuffling of the regional solutions teams with the new administration at the governor's office, and with a lot of new regional solutions coordinators, that information isn't readily available. So if you have an opportunity to talk to your regional solutions coordinator for your region, you can add that to the application as far as how you are looking to meet those priorities. But as of right now, unless things change between now and when our applications are due, we're not going to put a lot of weight on that because there isn't a lot of information out there on the website. We're also going to look at how or whether multiple jurisdictions could be benefited from the type of project that you're submitting. I should have said this earlier, but when you're looking at how you are meeting priorities, those priorities 1 through 5 in the application process, you can check multiple boxes. So for instance, if you are looking to create something that is going to promote economic development, which meets our #1 priority, but you're also looking to create, say, a template or something that could be replicated in other regions, educational brochure, something along those lines, then you can also check that box. And that's something that if we see multiple boxes being checked on these applications, then as you can imagine, those rise up as far as our priority for funding. And then another mandatory piece is our equity and inclusion piece. And it's laid out in the application, but we want you to demonstrate a commitment to inclusion of priority populations, and we'll go into some detail on that in a second. And then also, while this isn't mandatory, it's something that we take into consideration. It's really done on a case-by-case basis. And once again, we don't want to be looking like we're favoring larger jurisdictions over smaller jurisdictions, but grantee leverage, whether a jurisdiction is able to provide any match or any skin in the game, is something that we consider. But once again, if it's a smaller jurisdiction or if it's a jurisdiction that doesn't have the resources available to them to be able to provide a match, it's not a requirement. It's not a mandatory piece of the application. So the 3 highlighted, so they should have been numbered 1 through 5, not A, B, C, D, E. But these are the 5 priorities that I outlined earlier. The top 3 are highlighted because we're going to give a little bit more information on each one of those. And to be quite honest, because we always, like I mentioned earlier, we always receive substantial amount more interest in this program than what we can fund. It's very rare for projects that fall into the fourth and fifth categories to get funded. Not to say it couldn't happen this year. I don't want to discourage folks from submitting in those categories, but in the past, typically we've only really been able to fund, for the most part, projects that meet those first three priorities. So in regards to economic development, here are a few examples of projects. Obviously, this isn't a completely inclusive list. There are a lot of other things that could be on this list. If you are thinking of submitting something in this category and have an idea of a type of project that you want to pursue that isn't on this list, I'd advise you to either, well, first start with your regional representative. Definitely, that's the first place to start. And then it may be necessary to work into the conversation our economic development specialist, Lee McElvain. So the first example here is our economic opportunities analysis. And then specifically, if you, like I said earlier, if you can check multiple boxes, if you can focus an economic opportunities analysis to be inclusive of priority populations within the business community, that will help your project rise to the surface a little bit more. A targeted industry analysis, where the objective is economic diversification. Another example is a wetland inventory and mitigation plan for an industrial site. Another example would be redevelopment, or creating a redevelopment toolbox for, say, a commercial strip in town. Another example are developing citywide public facilities element, something that stresses climate change and resilience to climate change. And then another category is developing intergovernmental agreements to carry out a public facilities plan. In regards to natural hazards, I'm going to turn it over to Christine Shirley, who's with us today from our department, to go over the next few slides.
Thank you. Okay, good morning. So I'm going to talk about planning for resilience to natural hazard events and climate change. And we go to the next slide. And I want to emphasize that in our worldview, resilience needs to focus on pre-planning, planning before the disaster. So, so much of our resilience response has been post-disaster, and we're looking for proposals that reduce the impact of natural hazards, ensure survival, and create positive movement forward towards transforming into the new climate environment. Thinking about that before the event happens. We can go on to the next one. All right, so how you might do this is Goal 7 requires that new data be incorporated into your comprehensive plans. That would be something that would be fundable, and not only incorporating it into your comp plans, but also into your land use regulations. And one of the projects that could be beneficial is to look at your natural hazards mitigation plan and think about how you might change your land use regulations to achieve the goals that are outlined in those natural hazard mitigation plans. We can also fund the update of natural hazard mitigation plans. Many of them do not include climate change now, and so you might want to look at your plans and see how you might incorporate climate change into them. And also, many of our natural hazard mitigation plans don't have complete information about the effects of hazards and climate change, particularly on priority populations. And that would be another area that would be beneficial to seek funding for. And finally, as I mentioned, we would like a focus on pre-disaster planning. And one area that is particularly in need of some thought is pre-disaster recovery planning. So what would you do after an event that is forecast for your area to support people and business and recovery? And thinking about that in advance. So we can go on. So some of examples here, acting on new data requires a public process. So that would be a fundable part of your application, updating those comp plans, but most importantly, incorporating those comp plan policies into your land use regulations and administrative procedures to make them actionable. On the natural hazard mitigation plan, those also include wildfire protection plans, climate adaptation plans, and pre-disaster recovery plans. And all of those can be incorporated into one umbrella. So maybe you have all those plans, but they're not integrated. Maybe you're missing one of the pieces. So those are projects you can consider. And then finally, there's resilience studies and activities such as planning for the Cascadia event, planning for the relocation of critical facilities. And this would be an example of where you would look at your critical facilities and their location and their exposure to hazards and think about how you might either harden them or relocate them, and get yourself ready to prepare applications for FEMA hazard mitigation grants. And then economic resilience, understanding supply chains, transportation routes, business continuity, that kind of thing, within the whole community. And then outreach and education projects involve helping people to understand what their exposures are, not only to the hazards, but how those hazards impinge on the infrastructure, their buildings, their businesses, and so on. So those are examples of projects that might fall under the resilience study or activities category. All right, so the other part that's important is that a lot of these federal applications require local match. If you have a federal application that is very close to being funded, you can use these grants as part of that match for the local match. But I would not recommend that you do it if you don't already have an application well underway, because it takes too long for FEMA to get through the process for you to use the funds effectively. And then finally, well, not finally, think about ways that your resilience planning can intersect with the other categories that Josh mentioned. And then I also wanted to say that we are available at DLCD to help you craft a resilience application, as well as to link you up with organizations like Oregon Climate Change Resilience Institute, who can help you craft an application about climate change. And also during the project, we can be available. But if you need assistance with the crafting of an application that addresses natural hazards or climate change, please reach out to our hazards team. Thanks.
Chris, thank you for that. I appreciate it. I'm assuming you'll be around for Q&A in case anything comes up.
Oh, yes.
Awesome. Thank you. So the next priority that we're going to provide a little bit more example on is providing guidance or examples for other jurisdictions. One of the things that we're really trying to do this biennium is to focus on voluntary periodic review. We have had some successful voluntary periodic review projects in the not too distant past, and we're really looking to try to promote that through our technical assistance grants. We recognize our periodic review program has been substantially underfunded for quite some time, and for the most part, periodic review really doesn't exist because of that. We want to, as a department, try to provide some incentive for jurisdictions to be able to enter into a voluntary process. So if you are interested in voluntary periodic review, I'd strongly recommend you contacting your local representative, your regional rep, to be able to start a conversation about that. It may be that the project is bigger in scope, and you won't be able to pull a project together for this application, because sometimes these periodic review projects take quite a while to kind of develop the scope, but it's not too late. It's definitely an option for jurisdictions right now. One of the other examples is developing a comprehensive non-resource land designation process. This is a complicated process that a few jurisdictions across the state have embarked on. The success on those projects has been pretty limited. And if someone's interested in this conversation, it would be for a county. So if a county's interested in this conversation, once again, strongly recommend you contacting your regional rep to be able to kind of work through this one ahead of time. The next one is to develop clear and objective standards for housing on rural lands or lands protected by planning goals 5, 7, 15, or some of the coastal goals. The next example would be utilization of collaborative regional problem-solving process, which is a very underutilized piece of statute that allows jurisdictions to come together and ask for some relief of administrative rules when they're looking to solve problems. So that's definitely, like I said, an underutilized process up till now. We're really hoping to garner a little bit more support for that, because it has translated into a successful project, at least in one region of the state, and we think it could serve as a template for others as well. And then, there are a lot of ways for folks to be creative. These are just examples. Once again, if your project that you're thinking about or that you've been chewing on for a while doesn't fit into these categories, that doesn't mean that it's not going to be a priority for DLCD to fund. In fact, some of the best projects we've seen over the years have been ones that don't fit into these categories, that are creative, that are looking to solve problems in a creative way, and we're definitely here to try to promote that kind of thinking. Next, I want to get into the equity guidelines. As I mentioned, this is something that we really first built into our application process the last biennium. And because of lack of funding, we really didn't do it complete justice as far as making it a thorough process. And I think we were able to really kind of start the ball moving, which was a step in the right direction. But this biennium, we're really starting to put some more resources and time and energy into making this a substantial priority for our application. So I'm going to go over the priority populations, application guidelines, some of the resources for applicants, the census quick facts demo, and then DI consultants opportunities. So this biennium, applicants in all of the technical assistance grant categories are required to propose outreach and community participation plans that reflect inclusive outreach to priority populations, which are identified in the state of Oregon's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Action Plan. While local conditions vary, substantially around the state, grant applications should describe the applicant's consideration of the following priority populations. So Black and African American, Indigenous, Native American or Native Alaskan, persons of color, limited English proficiency, people with disabilities, extremely low income and are homeless, or other locally identified priority populations. So as part of the application, you will need to identify priority populations within the planning area or the project impact area, and describe anticipated impacts and outcomes, including benefits to and burdens on priority populations that may result from the proposed project. Oh, let me go back to that. One of the things we provided in the application was a link to the equity guidance. So I would recommend looking at the equity guidance that we provided as part of the application. It provides links to Portland State University data, census data, other information that you can use to provide you assistance in filling out the application. Part of the project is going to be the completion of an outreach and public engagement plan, which is designed to involve impacted priority populations, including specific goals for participation. And it's also going to include a post-project evaluation of representation of and participation by priority populations in citizen and technical advisory groups. The resources we provided in the link that is part of our application goes to the State of Oregon Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Plan. I realized when I looked at that link this morning that the link takes you somewhere that doesn't exist anymore. It's an outdated document. So the link at the bottom of the screen right here is the correct link to use to go to the DEI action plan for the state of Oregon. As I said, Portland State University Population Research Center and census data is also linked. PSU has a lot of information that would be very helpful for you putting together your applications. There are other, I don't want to go into all the detail, but we've provided some examples of public engagement models and also some equity toolkits that are also available for you to peruse on that page. Something that we are doing this year, which is new, and I think will be especially helpful for smaller jurisdictions, is that we're providing assistance for each jurisdiction that's submitting to receive up to 8 hours of technical assistance to develop a couple different things. So if you're awarded the grant, you can use your time to provide translation and outreach materials, to review outreach engagement plans, to identify additional outreach strategies, to identify evaluation measures for participation by priority population. So that's just a couple of examples. Once again, you know, basically what we're recognizing is that this is new for our application process, and we want to help ensure that jurisdictions are able to fulfill what we're setting out as obligations for you all, and we're going to provide some assistance in that regard. So what are the best practices? Well, like I've said a number of times here, meet early with your regional representatives. So our regional representatives can provide advice. They can provide examples of successful projects that we've funded in the past, and we can assist you with applications. So I put a little caveat here because we don't want to necessarily say that if we're helping you or assisting you with an application, that it's guaranteed that your project's going to get funded. But we can help, especially provide assistance with smaller jurisdictions to help put the pieces of an application together. You know, we've done our best to try to make this as simple of an application process as possible, but we still recognize that it takes work, right? And especially with some of these new obligations that we're putting forward as far as the application is concerned, we're here to help assist you in regards to that. So we can help you, you know, put those pieces together for the application. We can also just be on call if once you've put the application together, just to review it and provide comments for you. Once again, same caveat applies. Doesn't mean that you're going to get funded necessarily, but we can help provide guidance based on the various applications we've seen in the past that have been successful. And part of that's helping you meet as many of the evaluation criteria as possible. So people to contact, once again, first point of communication really should be with your regional representative. If you don't know who your regional representative is, we do have a map and a listing of all the regional representatives throughout the state. There are 9 of us around the state. So you can go to our website and find out who your rep is. If you don't know who they are, start with them. These other folks on the list, you heard from Christine Shirley earlier. She's available to help with climate change, resiliency stuff, and also natural hazards. We have Marion from our department who can help with natural hazards mitigation planning. And then we have Gordon Howard, who's our community services division manager. So with that, let's go ahead and open it up to Q&A here. We're running quite ahead of schedule, but we definitely don't need to take up all hour and a half if there isn't enough conversation to fill that.
Hey, Josh, there's a couple questions in chat that I'll go over first. First one from Matt was, will the presentation slides be available afterwards?
Elliot, I think so. Can you answer that one?
Oh, I don't have them, but if someone sends them to me, I can send them to whoever. So yes.
Sure, we can make them available. We are going to have another round to another webinar, but we can definitely make them available. I'll see about getting them posted on our website, but we can definitely just send out a link to all the participants to be able to just have access to it as well.
Okay, perfect. And I believe I sent you and Angela the participants earlier, the registration. Second question from Jennifer, do we include a request if we want to use 8 hours of technical assistance in our application to assist with equity and inclusion in our outreach plan? Or is that something DLCD would add into our application afterward?
Jennifer, great question. So the short answer is we're as far as the application's concerned, we're not offering these services at the time of application. So if you have questions about this during your application, then contact your regional representative and they can help walk you through it. They may need to bring in some other staff from DLCD to kind of give you some guidance on that. The 8 hours, or it's really up to 8 hours of assistance, is really in regards to the actual project. So once we figure out which projects we're going to fund, we then start to develop a scope of work with each jurisdiction. Once we develop that scope of work, or actually during the process of developing that scope of work, we'll really have an idea about how much assistance a jurisdiction needs and or wants. And then that's really what we'll wrap into the scope of work. But as far as I understand it, we don't need to, even at that point, we don't even need to specify it. We're going to basically have a consultant on staff to be able to provide assistance on a need-be basis. So the short answer is we'll be able to kind of be able to figure that out during the scope of work process, but it's not even really necessary during that process. It'll be an on-call situation that we can provide assistance whenever the need arises.
And Josh, I'm assuming you have access to chat as well. There's a couple more that have popped down in the bottom if you want to just take a look at those and answer them as you see.
Go on through it. I think the next one from Nicole. Yeah, so the question, Nicole, and feel free to raise your hand if you want to pop on if I'm not understanding it right. It's about whether you should focus, kind of a jurisdiction should focus on one project or multiple projects. My recommendation, of course, we can't limit, DLCD can and shouldn't limit jurisdiction as to how many applications they can submit. I would, however, recommend that you submit the project that you think is going to be the most successful. You know, as I mentioned earlier, we always have more requests than what we can fulfill as far as funding. So what I would say to you is to work closely with your regional representative on figuring out what project is going to be of the highest priority, and check the boxes that are higher up on the list of priorities, and be able to give you a little bit more of an opportunity to be successful. If projects are related, are very closely related, you could wrap in potentially two projects. Maybe one dovetails right off of one, or there's a substantial amount of overlap. Of course, that's an option. I wouldn't recommend submitting 3 totally separate projects or a few separate projects, either as separate applications or as one app. So hopefully that answers your question. Scott, you had a question about anticipating additional funding for counties' compliance with recent housing legislation. I don't know about that, Scott. I'm going to need to check in with Gordon Howard and probably Ethan Stuckmeyer from our housing team, and I can get back to you on that. And since I'm not answering your question right now, when we send out a link to these slides, I'll make sure that we provide an answer to that in that email so everyone has that. All right. Matt, question about typical or average dollar amount. I don't have the data offhand to tell you what the average is. There is a pretty substantial range from projects that propose just a few $1,000s to projects that are in the low 6 figures. Getting back to what I said earlier about the budget, you know, recognizing we have, you know, less than $1 million to work with here. You know, we try to be very considerate about a couple things. One is, you know, funding as many jurisdictions as possible. We you know, are cognizant that this is a very limited opportunity for folks. It only comes around every 2 years. It is a pretty big umbrella for funding compared to some of our other you know, funding sources like TGM, for instance, which is very much more of a focused application. The other thing that we do take into consideration when we're looking at who to fund here is to have some geographic distribution across the state. So that's a long answer to your question, but basically kind of what I would advise is to try to focus on projects that are maybe in the lower to medium size range, not to dissuade anybody from submitting anything. We don't want to do that, but projects that maybe are in the, you know, $20,000 to $70,000 range are probably the projects that we typically see and typically fund through this project. And obviously, if you have a really small project that you haven't been able to work on, that's under $20,000, those projects are interesting because, as you can imagine, at the end of the day, once we award projects, we often have a little bit of money to work with. So if jurisdictions have a small project, we can often fund those, even if they don't necessarily meet some of the top priorities, just because of how much money we have left over after providing our initial awards. Jennifer, you asked a question about who actually makes the decisions on the funding. Is it a panel? Are regional reps involved? Is it during a public meeting? So the answer is it's not during a public meeting. This is a DLC, in-house DLCD decision. Essentially what happens is the regional representatives get the first review of projects in their region. We go through and provide input. We fill out a form basically that answers a few questions. Does it meet one of the objectives or the priorities that we put forward? Does it contain, clear objectives and, all the things that I went over earlier? And is it a complete application? So first we do that. That's kind of the initial stage. Then what happens is we all come together as DLCD reps, Gordon Howard, who's our community services division manager, and a few other of our specialists, our economic development specialists, our housing specialists, et cetera, come together. And what we do is we basically have a big conversation about it. We put together some initial rankings, and then after that, we figure out how that jives with how much money is available. So that might have been a little bit more information than what you're looking for, but that's the process, how it works. Jessica asked about, are there examples of past awarded grant proposals? The answer is yes. I'll need to dig in to see if we have any on our website. I don't know. I think it's pretty limited if we do. What I would suggest though, because we have a slew of data and information on our servers, is to contact your regional representative. If you have a particular type of project that you're looking at, I was going to say I'm sure there's a good chance that we can provide an example for you of something similar that was done, maybe not in your region, but across the state. So that's really where you want to look at.
So I can address Sage's question. The question was, they recently updated their hazard mitigation plan, but it did not include an update of the community wildfire protection plan. So yes, you can ask for funding to update that part of the plan, or do it independently and then integrate it into your natural hazard mitigation plan. Likewise with climate change adaptation, or other parts of the hazard mitigation plan that maybe are a little weak, you can ask for a project to be funded to upgrade those parts of the plan. Post-disaster recovery planning or pre-disaster recovery planning is another part. And then I mentioned the word match. So what I meant to convey in that is that FEMA grants often require a local match of 25%. This is non-federal money, and thus it can be used for match. However, the FEMA application process is so long that we don't recommend that you ask for a project that requires non-federal match unless you already have the grant well on its way towards obligation, because it just takes too long to go through the FEMA process. But if you need to supplement a project that you already have funded through FEMA, that would be something you might consider. Does that sound about right, Josh?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Match, yeah.
I think we've gone through the list here. I don't think we've missed any, but if we did, type up. We'll hang on here for a few more minutes. So if you have a lingering question, pop it in the chat or raise your hand now.
So Josh, there's one about the matching for this grant.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I missed that one. So the answer is yes. So the question was, are requests ever approved at less than the amount proposed? Yes, so the short answer is yes. And sometimes they're approved for more, which is very unlikely. It's more likely to happen in our housing grants. But basically what happens, as you can imagine, at the end of the day, we have, a number of, projects that meet the priorities, and we have a certain dollar figure. And when we try to reconcile those, sometimes it doesn't work out exactly right. Usually it doesn't work out exactly right. So what happens is, at the end of the day, we, as regional reps, have to go back sometimes and talk to our jurisdictions about whether a project is able to be funded at a lesser amount. So some projects in some jurisdictions will be able to absorb that. Say they ask for $50,000 and we only have $35,000 to provide. Some jurisdictions will say, yes, you know, we'll take whatever we can get because we were going to do this project anyway. Some jurisdictions, though, 50,000, the difference between 35 and 50, that $15,000 is too much for them to absorb, or they just don't have the capacity, in which case we may need to go and look at cutting a different project. So while we try to avoid it, we do need to make some adjustments often at the end of the day to change some scopes, or just to change the amount that we're offering for the project.
And then there's a question about, is there match requirement for this grant? And I think Josh mentioned that no, not specifically, but if you do, if you are able to put some match in, it does show a commitment to the project and might get you a little bump up in the priority ranking.
That's right. It's another box for us to check. So if you do provide some match, you're showing that you've got some skin in the game. But once again, I don't want it to come off that we're favoring jurisdictions that can only provide a match, because that's not what we're trying to do. In fact, a lot of what we're trying to do is provide funding to jurisdictions that wouldn't be able to do a project without our help. And a lot of those jurisdictions are the ones that can't provide a match. So while it is something that we consider, it's something that we balance out with all of the other requirements and priorities. So it's not a mandatory thing. It's not a deal breaker. All right, so got a good question here about kind of a follow-up on an application for housing. And this is something I didn't go into. You know, we have a myriad of different grant opportunities at the state. You know, when there's funding. The last couple bienniums, we've had a lot of funding when it comes to housing. So we've had an entirely different housing grant application process, which hopefully many of you are aware of. Some of you have probably submitted for. So really, to back up a little bit, technical assistance grants, the #1 priority used to be housing. But now that we have a whole separate program established for that, a grant program established for that, that's dropped off of the priority list. But this question really has to do with kind of a follow-up comprehensive plan amendment to update a comprehensive plan to kind of coincide with that. So what I would recommend here is to talk to your regional representative. I think the devil is going to be in the details on this one a little bit. I would say that it's not necessarily too much of a commitment for a small jurisdiction to work on, but you might want to limit the scope on a comprehensive plan update a little bit. As you all know, our comprehensive plans in Oregon, a lot of them are old, but a lot of the information in them, while it might be a little outdated, is still really good information. Some of it's more pertinent and some of it's less pertinent to where we find ourselves today. So it may be that you focus in on a couple different pieces of your comprehensive plan versus updating the entire thing. But I'd really recommend getting into the details with your regional representative and maybe someone from our housing team as well, if that project gets funded on the housing side of things. Scott, I agree. So our housing program, we believe, we haven't made any decisions on housing yet, but based on the number of applications and the amounts that we're putting to those applications, we do feel that it's going to be obligated. So this is going to be a little different than our housing program in the past, the recent past, where we've had as much money to be able to divvy out to communities, pretty much to award to all the projects that came in. This year it's not going to be that way. So I think thank you, Angie. You're asking me to read the question. So Scott, let me back up. Scott is asking about our housing program being fully obligated and counties needing funding as well for this kind of work. And we agree. So the program is likely going to be obligated, the housing program. We recognize counties do need funding for this. As I mentioned earlier, I'm just standing in for Gordon Howard on this. He and probably Ethan Stuckmeyer know the answer to this. I don't. So that'll be something that I'll circle back with you on when we provide the slide deck to our participants here. Do we have any other lingering questions from folks? Okay, well, with nothing popping up here, Angela, are you still on?
Yes, I am.
Okay, when's the next webinar? I'm not thinking that these folks are going to want to come back, but if they had some other questions, when's the next webinar set up for?
It is September 6th from 1 to 2:30.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and I guess I didn't realize that attendees couldn't see the chat. Sorry. Sorry to folks. I thought
Me
I
neither.
was reading with me.
I made a change in the chat settings. Can anyone tell me if they can now, if you're an attendee, can you see the chat now or not so much still? I'm just curious for next time. If they don't respond, that's fine too, but still can't. Okay, thank you, Angie. Good
All
to
right,
know.
we'll dial that in for the next one. Thanks for being the guinea pigs here. Oh, cool. It looks like it might have just
Well,
worked.
some say they can, so yeah. I just changed it to everyone. That's what I did, so hopefully people can see, but some are saying they can't, so I don't know.
Wait, I think maybe it just worked out. Well, great. Well, thanks everybody for attending. Once again, we have another one set up. You all probably don't need to participate in another one of these. Your next step, if you have questions, is to reach out to your regional rep, and then if they need to pull in any of our specialists, they can do that. But that's really the next step for you all. And yeah, good luck on the application process if you're looking to submit. And yeah, we look forward to getting a chance to review some cool projects as you guys submit them. Thank you all.